guys, Ron here, and ever since I became a PokeTuber, I've been wondering what was the best year to be a Pokemon fan? Was it during Pokemania, or do any of the years from the last decade actually surpass them? In this video, I'm gonna go through every year from 1996 to 2025 and highlight all the major and minor releases of video games, animated media, events, merchandise, and more. Basically everything that defined the last 30 years and rank them all to answer this question. Now I will describe a vast majority of the releases in Japan as well, especially since for so many years, whenever there was something happening in the East, hype was building up in the West. But this video is from the perspective of someone from the West, and more specifically, fans in the Anglosphere. So think North America, UK, Australia, etc. Basically the places where a majority of my viewers are from. So while things happening in the Japans will contribute to each year's ranking, things happening in places like the US will be prioritized. Also, we're coming at this from a perspective of a fan who is still into Pokemon. Like, I'm not really gonna count the opinion of someone who has been jaded or disillusioned with the franchise, not because they don't have a valid point, but rather because fans being upset with Pokemon have existed way earlier than you think. I mean, people thought Game Freak was lazy all the way back in Gen 2. So if we're ranking every year in chronological order, let's begin with 1996. The year I was born. No other major thing happened that year, but Game Freak happened to release a little game called Pokemon Red and Green, and soon after, the trading card game. Now, since we're kind of measuring the worldwide impact of Pokemon and how much hype there was in the West for Pokemon, the first 2 years of Pokemon, before the franchise became an international success, are super tough to rank, and there are valid reasons to put 1996 in both the lowest and highest tier, because technically this year is the most important for Pokemon, but it was also the year there were the least amount of Pokemon fans ever. So I'm basically gonna soft disqualify 1996 by putting it in C tier. It's okay, it simply wasn't the best year to be a Pokemon fan. In 1997, the anime and Pokemon Adventures manga made their debut in Japan. If 1996 is a C tier, then this year is too. They laid the groundwork. But since we're looking at this list from an English-speaking perspective, there wasn't much hype yet. 1998, however, is the beginning of Pokemania. Red and Blue were released in the West, and the anime becomes a hit here too. People were going nuts, and it was even more exciting in Japan, with Pokemon Yellow, the first movie, and a bunch of spin-off games like the original Japan-exclusive Pokemon Stadium, Hey You Pikachu, Pocket Pikachu, the TCG video game, and the first ever Pokemon Center in Tokyo. This was an explosion of popularity and success, and truly an example of a top-tier Pokemon year, where both the East and the West were absolutely eating. It is our first S-tier year. And of course, 1999 wasn't a letdown either. Snap and Pinball came to the US as well, and the Pokemon TCG making their iconic debut over here. Here's the US, that's what I'm talking about. Many people who haven't consumed Pokemon think of the cards when they hear the word Pokemon. Super Smash Bros. Came out everywhere, shoving Pikachu in the faces of people who don't even play Pokemon. But that gives this year a tiny fraction of a point. Mewtwo Strikes Back in the West, as well as the second Pokemon movie in Japan, was a big deal. Japan may have been enjoying Pokemon even more than us that year, since not only did they get the real Pokemon Stadium, which to them is considered Pokemon Stadium 2, but Generation 2 makes its debut with Gold and Silver finally. Sequels that cemented Pokemon as, well, the opposite of a one-hit wonder. But this is all in Japan. Now, you'd think this would make 1999 as good of a year as the previous, but the biggest releases were just in Japan. And we're not compounding hype from previous years. The nature of this video is isolating each year on its own. So considering all the hype in the Anglosphere was centered around supplementary aspects of the franchise, like the card games, spin-offs, and movies, I'm gonna give it a high A. As high as an A can get. A+, really. Could have been in the top 5 best years if we weren't isolating every year by releases. The hype was big, but we're looking for even bigger releases, while the hype is also huge. And 2000 may be that legendary year. The Pokemon Company is born, but obviously the average fan doesn't care about such a thing. Puzzle League was released. That's okay, but that's just the icing on the cake. Outside of Japan, we finally got Pokemon Stadium and Hey You Pikachu, the trading card video game, and at long last, Pokemon Gold and Silver. We were feasting on main series, side games, and spin-off games. All while Japan had the third movie, Pokemon Crystal, and Pokemon Stadium 2. That's right, everyone around the world was bathing in the peak of Pokemania. That's what makes the year 2000 a top-tier S-tier year. But in 2001, Pokemania began to die down. Sure, we got Stadium 2 and Crystal worldwide, and some iconic Pokemon in Melee, but other than Pokemon USA being established, what would eventually become the Pokemon Company International, nothing major happened. Basically a year for third versions and spin-off sequels. Honestly, Japan wasn't having much of a good time either, but since us Westerners got some tasty snacks to tide us over, a B tier is a good ranking that I think makes sense. And now that the Pokemon movies aren't receiving massive theater releases, I'm unfortunately not going to mention the films since we kind of get one every year until Generation 8, so it would kind of just be a neutral point. 2002 was even worse, like substantially. Japan got Ruby and Sapphire, but nothing at all was released in the West. I mean, the first ever Pokemon TCG World Championships were held, but like only the super small amount of participants were actually able to witness that event. It wasn't like broadcast everywhere. For 99.9% of Pokemon fans outside of Japan, Pokemon was a dying fad, so considering 2002 may be contender for the worst year in Pokemon history, a very low D makes total sense. What a sharp decline. This was the year Junichi Masuda went to the hospital as a result of the stress of holding up the franchise. After all, he kinda thought he was killing Pokemon. But 2003 could help revive Pokemon in the West. Ruby and Sapphire were released outside of Japan and still selling well. It was a big deal. With a nice spin-off game, Pokemon Pinball RS. People enjoyed that. Pokemon didn't reach former heights just yet, but it was definitely back, especially with Pokemon Coliseum, Box, and Channel in Japan. A good year you can't complain about. B. 2004 was even better, with the entire world at the same time enjoying the first remakes, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. And by I didn't really mean at the same time, I mean like in the same year. The West finally got Pokemon Coliseum, and Japan getting a third version in Pokemon Emerald. This is also the first year where Play Pokemon managed the TCG World Championships. Pokemon Dash came out in Japan too, but I won't detract any points for that, because it was a great year. 2004 gets our first A-. 2005 was admirable too, with both Emerald and XD Gale of Darkness out in the rest of the world, and in Japan, they were focused on the debut of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon with Red and Blue Rescue Team, Troze 2. Not much supplementary media, but these were heavy-hitting video games nonetheless. Since third versions and side game sequels hold a bit less weight though, A- seems appropriate. 2006 was one I personally remember because it was a huge deal that we got Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and Pokemon Ranger in the West. Two super popular spin-off games that felt fun and fresh, all while we were getting Pokemon Diamond and Pearl leaks and news on websites like Cerebi as Generation 4 was rolling out in the East. Japan even got Pokemon Battle Revolution. It looked good to me at the time, but I didn't get to play it until next year. So while Pokemon fans outside of Japan were having a great time, technically we didn't really get any major releases, so A- feels like a perfect score once again. 2007 came a-knocking with Generation 4 and Battle Revolution in the West. Japan even got Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time and Darkness. Lucky bastards. It's safe to say people around the world were enjoying Pokemon again. Another A-. Great 3 years, but not exactly Pokemania. And while Battle Revolution was cool, it was kinda boring to play compared to Stadium and Coliseum, so Diamond and Pearl in the US very much carried this year. 2008, however, was sort of a dip. Funny how this was also the year I fell out of Pokemon for like the first time and only time ever. It was cool seeing Pokemon like Lucario in Super Smash Bros. Brawl and Pokemon Ranger Shadows of Almia. It was kinda neat, and it didn't sell bad. But while I played Pokemon Ranch for many months, it was the opposite of peak Pokemon. I'd say Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time and Darkness saved the year from being bottom tier. And while Japan got Platinum, in the West there wasn't much hype as we looked at leaks and screenshots of what basically seemed like Diamond and Pearl with extra stuff. Sure, it's cool to play, but not much of a hype season from across the ocean, aside from gawking at Giratina and Shaman Sky. C-tier year, honestly. We already finished playing Diamond and Pearl by the end of 2007, and there was basically nothing to do in 2008 if you weren't, a fan of spin-off games. But if you were, you had a great time. But we were so back in 2009. The Pokemon Company International is finally formed, and Pokemon Rumble came out, but nobody cares about that. Platinum and Mystery Dungeon Sky were out everywhere, and the first full World Championships were held with TCG and video games, and Heart Gold and Soul Silver were out in Japan, so even in the West we had our minds blown by screenshots on the internet. Pokepark Wii in Japan meant it was a good time to be a Nihonjin, A- without a doubt. 2010, however, was super respectable. I mean, imagine a kid in London or New York playing Heart Gold or Soul Silver as they're checking out the new Gen 5 Pokemon making the rounds online, because Black and White just got released in Japan. And if you want some more Pokemon on your TV, you got Pokepark Wii, all while the Global Link opens its doors. That's an A- right there. 2011 ain't no slouch either. Black and White comes out in the West while Pokepark 2 comes out in the East, but it really is mostly the Anglosphere that is having a blast with the main series game, while everybody else gets a rudimentary Pokedex 3D and Rumble Blast. I mean, the trading card game online goes live. Yeah, it's not the best year around the world, with simply one big release in the West and many very minor ones. B. Kinda similar to 2012. In hindsight, it was a quality year, with Black and White 2 and Pokemon Conquest out everywhere, but at the time they underperformed, at least for Pokemon. Despite Black and White 2 currently being my favorite Pokemon game, even I didn't go out and get him that year, so we got peak. but nobody recognized it yet. Pokédex 3D Pro and Dream Radar gave us some fun gimmicks, and in Japan, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity came out, but that honestly isn't enough to give this year more than a B as well. Definitely a divisive year. But goddamn is 2013 a legendary year. Already from the beginning of the year, as Iwata announced Generation 6 as the first to release simultaneously across the world, we were feeling the resurgence of Pokemon. The golden age of Poketubing began as the XY hype season, full of fairy types and megas, ushered in the 3D era of Pokemon, what many consider to be the beginning of modern Pokemon. The US had Gates to Infinity to tide them over, as well as Rumble U, and the release of Pokemon TV to make the anime even more accessible. But Pokemon Origins began the trend of supplementary animated material, and we absolutely loved it. It celebrated the history of Pokemon and got us excited for what was to come. And once X and Y came out, it attracted a ton of new players, and now that anime in general was becoming more mainstream, people began watching the X and Y anime before it even debuted in the West. With the internet making nerd and geek culture feel seen, we were in the midst of a Pokemon renaissance. The first year since Pokemania to be S tier. 2014 continued the hype. Bank was out around the world, which is actually pretty important. Unlike Battle Troze, Pokemon Art Academy doesn't give this year any points, but it doesn't detract any. It was fine. You know what definitely gives this year points though? True Green 7 begins his career as a Poketuber. Just kidding, that doesn't matter. But it shows how big the online Pokemon community became during this time. Hoenn was confirmed, and while there wasn't much official stuff happening until the release of ORAS at the end of the year, fans were definitely having fun online. Twitch Plays Pokemon changed the game, and Sejun Park's win with Pachirisu brought new eyes to the competitive scene. Even Super Smash Bros. Was hyping up Pokemon like Greninja, making it feel like Pokemon really was relevant in many online spaces. This was also a quality year. Deserves an A. 2015 though was when the hype died down a bit. Many were expecting Pokemon Z, especially with Zygarde cells and Magearna reveals, but nothing came. Pokemon Shuffle and Rumble World meant nothing to most fans, while Pokken Tournament and Super Mystery Dungeon, both in the US and in Japan, helped keep the franchise alive, considering Pokemon was the kind of game Pokemon fans, kind of wanted to see for decades. Ultimately, the contrast with the previous 2 years and one of the only years without any sort of main series Pokemon games puts 2015 in the C tier. Many of us remember 2015 being the first drought in a long time. But goddamn did 2016 compensate for that. With its 20th anniversary, Pokemon went all out with mythical events. The previous year's games releasing in the rest of the world, Gen 1, Mystery Dungeon, and Ranger finally releasing on the Virtual Console, and Pokemon Sun and Moon's announcement. This hype season was legendary. Some remember it being the game Pokemon hyped up more than any generation before it. It was all coming together, and with most of Pokemon Generations slowly releasing episodes leading up to the game's release, it really felt like Generation 7 was gonna be a culmination of every generation leading up to it. Sun and Moon's hype season really was the last one to not be marred by any controversy. Pretty much most of the fan base was on board with every announcement and reveal. But if 2013 sparked a fire in the hearts of Pokemon fans, 2016 is when that fire became an explosion. Pokemon Go was released in July of 2016, giving us momentary world peace before the world broke. It definitely wasn't Pokemon Duel being released in Japan that made 2016 the year that inspired this video. Will it end up taking the #1 spot? You'll have to watch the rest of the video to find out, but now it definitely deserves to be in the S tier, and no sane person would disagree. 2017 was the first controversial year. Ultra Sun and Moon were announced at the time, where people were kinda tired of third versions and were expecting a sequel like Black and White 2, or Pokemon Stars on the Switch, a rumor that amounted to nothing. While again, Ultra Sun and Moon ended up being one of my personal favorite Pokemon games ever, at the time, people didn't want to play through Pokemon Sun and Moon again a year after its release, considering the notorious amount of hand-holding and cutscenes in Generation 7. So while there technically was a major release this year, the fact that the only other pieces of media we got were Pokken Tournament DX and Gen 2 on the Virtual Console makes it a bit of a C-tier year. 2018 was slightly better, but as controversial and still around the same tier. I mean, we had Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee to attract all the new players coming from Pokemon Go. It made total sense. And in hindsight, Let's Go is appreciated, but at the time, people were very much divided. The first ever home console main series Pokemon game had a lot of expectations to meet after all. Super Smash Bros. Did give us a bit of Incineroar hype, and Detective Pikachu had some fans, but with Pokemon Quest being the only other spin-off, I can't say Pokemon fans were absolutely ecstatic that year. High C. 2019, however, is the most controversial year so far. Like, I barely have to mention the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution film that was released in Japan, or that freaking Pokemon Rumble Rush exists. I don't care about these. Why do I keep on mentioning Rumble? But goddamn, was there a lot of stuff happening in the Pokemon sphere this year. The Detective Pikachu film brought Pokemon back into the minds of everyone around the world. It very much capped off the hype that was first established in 2016 with Pokemon Go. And the announcement of Pokemon Sword and Shield were well received, but goddamn did things change when June rolled around. Dexit was the controversy surrounding the reveal that not every Pokemon will be available in Generation 9, and this forever split the fandom. It's basically the first year to receive a demerit and have its score lowered despite honestly being a genuinely amazing year to be a Pokemon fan. I mean, we got a film everybody was excited to see, Pokemon Masters, a popular mobile game making its debut, Ash finally becoming a champion, and then the release of a new generation of Pokemon. In terms of actual releases, it's as good as it gets, but I'm gonna have to exclude it from the top tier and give it an A. While I totally understand the critique of Sword and Shield and its lack of a full national dex, and the excuse that Game Freak gave for such a change was not good, but a majority of fans technically didn't really care, and some fans welcomed it. So while it was a terrible time to be a Pokemon fan online, a random 12-year-old kid who couldn't care less and just loves Pokemon was having an amazing year. 2020, despite the pandemic, was a very respectable year for Pokemon in terms of releases. Twilight Wings is a super underrated Pokemon animated series, Mystery Dungeon DX is a pretty fine remake, and of course, many people like me found the Isle of Armor and especially the Crown Tundra to be some of the most fun Pokemon playing experience that we've ever had. I was genuinely having a lot of fun with Pokemon that year. Not to mention, Pokemon released Gotcha, their music video for Bump of Chicken's song, and many Pokemon media connoisseurs still consider it to be the best piece of Pokemon media to date. Pokemon Home was out. We started getting some Poketunes here and there to showcase the Pokemon world in a more fun light. Smile and Cafe exists too, but here's the point. This is the beginning of postmodern Pokemon, where, yeah, people were very jaded when it comes to the games, but the Pokemon Company International is doing an admirable job releasing so much Pokemon-related media that there is something to enjoy every month or so. I'm giving 2020 an A- for the quantity. 2021 was a bit weird. There were some really good spin-off games that were released that year. I love the new Pokemon Snap, and so many still play Pokemon Unite, and Pokemon Evolutions was showcasing Pokemon in a more dramatic light too. It was a good year, and I didn't even mention the hype of Legends Arceus. It kept us going as we were getting a bit concerned about BDSP. Wow. Wow. What the hell? Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, while still fine games on their own technically, were the most disappointed fans were about a Pokemon game so far. So while we technically had a main series game released that year, there was no hype for it. The P25 music album and its various releases, while not absolute bangers or anything, did help celebrate the 25th anniversary in some way. It was far from the heights of Pokemon's 20th anniversary, but not an absolute flop of a year. There were things to love. I'm giving it a B. 2022 will be the most controversial ranking in this video. But listen, it's the only year where two huge main series games were released. Legends Arceus, despite not being perfect, were very well received by fans. That alone could give this year a good mark. But of course we had Scarlet and Violet. Yes, they were the most broken Pokemon games of all time, and the hype did die down quite a bit the following year. But despite a big portion of fans considering these the worst Pokemon games ever, another big portion considered it the best Pokemon games ever, and all the other fans simply had a great time playing them, despite understanding how unfinished they were. And on the animated end, Hisuian Snow was cool to watch, and of course, you really can't gloss over Ash becoming a world champion and achieving his goal of becoming a Pokemon master. On paper, this was an S-tier year, and even though I can acknowledge that many fans didn't have the best November and December, a majority of fans did have a blast. And the momentum did not stop. 2023 was like 2020 on crack. It was another quantity over quality year. We got Pokemon Sleep, Detective Pikachu Returns, the beginning of a bunch of animated clips on social media, Project Voltage with Hatsune Miku, and probably the most impressive of these secondary pieces of media, Pokemon Concierge at the very end of the year. But that's just the extra spice on this year's craziness. Pokemon Horizons debuts in Japan, and again, at this point, many fans are watching the show in sub, so it's very relevant in the West. Pokemon released their TCG short series Path to the Peak, priming people up for the reveal of Pocket. Paldean Winds was another pleasant surprise, keeping up the animated series tradition each generation. But the creme de la creme was the Teal Mask and Indigo Disc, some of the best time I've had ever playing a main series Pokemon game, and overall very well received Pokemon DLCs. They technically gave us way more new content, Pokemon, and story than any third version like Pokemon Platinum ever has. So with that in mind, I have to give this jam-packed year an A. It very much was the year with the most content for us to mindlessly consume. But I don't think 2024 maintained the hype. Sure, we got season 2 of Pokétoons and more animated stuff on social media. I mean, China got a whole series called Poke Video Decks before we did. So literally nothing happened until the second half of the year when the Terra leaks leaked. And this isn't even an official Pokemon release. Technically, this is a bad thing. Not only was data breached, but a bunch of fans lamented over the fact that we didn't get a lot of cool stuff that we could have. But a majority of fans did enjoy the leaks, and it kept Pokemon relevant for a few months until Pokemon TCG Pocket was released. This was definitely a big deal, but Pokemon wouldn't really see the effects until 2025. But you may have noticed that I actually didn't mention the post-pandemic TCG boom in this video, because honestly, not only is that not really attributed to any specific year, but also the rise in scalping and general disingenuous Pokemon card buyers who were hopping on the bandwagon didn't really make it more fun for fans. Regardless, TCG Pocket really was the only noteworthy piece of official Pokemon content in 2024, making it contender for the worst year in Pokemon ever. Nothing happened except for a spin-off game and some leaks. So D tier it is. But do I rank 2025? It's kind of incomplete. I will, just know that it's not definitive. While a major main series game will be released by the time this video comes out, as of making this video, this was also a D tier year. That will probably be bumped up to the B tier, assuming Legends ZA will have a good reception. But honestly, the hype of ZA, while noteworthy for all the mega reveals, was not as strong as most games before it. Other than Legends ZA, nothing happened in 2025, which is very unusual in post-pandemic Pokemon, where they announced so many projects and released a bunch of supplementary content. We finally got access to those Chinese animated shorts, and Colosseum is on the Switch too, perhaps? Definitely not when I'm writing this video. So far, this is the worst year in Pokemon. But again, that's not a bad thing, because Game Freak is finally slowing down, and we all know they're saving everything for the 30th anniversary in 2026, which could end up being another S-tier year. But what were all the S-tier years, and which do I think was the absolute best year to be a Pokemon fan? Here is the full list, in a loose order. A majority of the years were good. Being a fan of the biggest media franchise of all time is kinda worth it. And we had a couple of years in a row in which Pokemon fans were eating. Obviously, Pokemania from 1998 to 2000 was the first sort of golden era, but then honestly, 2004 to 2007 was an underrated time, with 4 A- in a row. But let's see our top 5. Any of these years could be considered the best year to be a Pokemon fan. 2022 was record-breaking when it came to the main series. I have never played more Pokemon than in that year. 2013 was the biggest of modern Pokemon, the archetype for how the Pokemon Company should plan a year and roll out a new generation. 1998 was the year Pokemon became a worldwide sensation and what we now know as Pokemania. But that year wasn't the apex of the mania. 2016 was a legendary year, probably the most impactful Pokemon has ever been since Generation 1, in terms of how conscious the franchise was in the minds of the average person in the West. I've never seen such a successful promotion of a new generation, launch of any video game, especially a mobile game, and celebration of a franchise's anniversary. But while this year could totally be the best year to be a Pokemon fan in recent memory, the year 2000 was probably the best year to simply be a kid, with major spin-offs, movies, and multiple main series games in the East and the West, without the noise of the internet and with all the innocence of being a child. If you were to measure the amount of fun that Pokemon fans were having, I'm sure this year would yield the biggest result. I'm so glad that a year from every decade managed to enter the top 5, but no other year makes me more envious of youth than 2000. I hope you can see the logic in my list. And if you want to see more videos like these, leave a like and subscribe. Please check out all the videos where I design my own Pokemon if you haven't, and consider becoming a patron to get cool rewards like seeing my videos early and my members Discord, which you can also get by pressing the join button and becoming a YouTube member. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky for sneak peeks and notifications too. Bye!